Welcome to Identity Crisis, a show about news and ideas from the Shalom Hartman Institute. I'm Yehuda Kurtzer, president of Shalom Hartman Institute North America. We're recording this week's episode on Tuesday, May 26th. And this week is our special Shavuot episode as we, the Jewish people, collectively prepare for the experience of receiving the Torah several thousand years ago, but something that actually happens every year. So we're going to do that again in a couple of days, perhaps more from the privacy of our own homes than at any other time in Jewish history. And to talk to me about this, about Torah study, about the audacious attempt to put all of Torah on the internet, I'm joined this week by a special guest, a good friend of mine, Josh Four. Josh Four, for those of you who don't know, is kind of like the Jewish community's equivalent of that guy from the beer commercial, the most interesting man in the world. Josh is the acclaimed author of a book called Moonwalking with Einstein, which, among other things, chronicled his journey to becoming the USA memory champion. He's also one of the founders of Atlas Obscura. He has a book, Promised, on some time spent with the last surviving tribe of hunters and gatherers in the world. And perhaps most important for the purpose of our discussion, he's one of the co-founders of Sefaria, this ambitious attempt to put Torah on the internet. Josh, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here. And
it's great to see you too.
To kick us off, just tell us something great that you've been reading or watching when in your obviously very spare time when you're not homeschooling your children at home during the day.
In all seriousness, the thing that I have been watching the most recently intersects with homeschooling, which is a channel on YouTube called Numberphile that is all of these like PhDs in math explaining really complicated mathematical topics like for kids. It's amazing. I highly recommend it.
That would be great for me because I don't know very much about math or science, but I only know math or science for the purposes of being able to make metaphors in the humanities. So that would
this is so filled with that. That's like the cutting edge of math is where you really find your sermon material, I think.
So for our listeners, Josh and I know each other because 20 years ago, summer 1999, I believe.
Yeah.
Josh was a Bronfman Youth Fellow, and I had the joy of being his counselor that summer. So it's hard for me to, it's hard for me to think about when over that summer this happened, but also on that summer was Brett Lockspizer, who was one of your co-founders of Sefaria. And I've always been curious about, did that conversation about Sefaria originate in that Hartman summer? And kind of where did that come from in this, in your own journey?
What's funny is Brett and I were friendly on that trip, but we weren't like super close. I don't think we ever talked about anything that was a predecessor to Sefaria. In fact, we lost touch for 10 years. But it's the power of that Bronfman network, I guess, that like I had heard that he had recently left a job at Google. And I just had this notion that he might be thinking about something similar to this. And I called him out of the blue. And it's like one of these phone calls where we were both thinking the exact same thought at the exact same time. And it was almost magical that we came out of that phone call and we're like, you know what, somebody should do this. And then I was like, wait a minute, maybe we should do this.
So what do you mean by this? When you try to come to the kernel of, I assume that you didn't imagine at the time all of what Sefaria would become, but there's some kernel or some essence of that project. And what is that for you?
Well, so it started with, let's solve a problem, which is, why is it that this must have been 2010. Why is it that in 2010, if I Google the Talmud in English, I get as my top 3 search results, like some PDFs of the Sonsino translation, which turns out are actually still under copyright, so they're pirated. I get like this partial 1918 translation that's unreadable and an anti-Semitic website. And like, how could that be the case? In like, this is where people live. This is not 1996, this was 2010. And so we were like, we got to fix that. But in the process of thinking that through, and I think actually from this was embedded in the germ of the idea, was there's an incredible opportunity to help these texts transition from the age of print into the digital age. And that if we did it in the right spirit and in the right way, It could be a really important thing for how these texts live in the future. And we didn't quite trust that it would happen in the right way if we didn't get involved and try and do this ourselves.
So I'm a little bit mad that you waited to 2010 because I finished my doctorate in 2009 and it would have been way more helpful. And I think I drove like a majority of the traffic to the anti-Semitic site because actually it's pretty good in terms of like the availability of Talmud during that time. But what was at stake for you? Like why of all of the various intellectual hobbies and pursuits that you might have been pursuing, like why this of all things? You're not a professional Talmudist.
Not even close.
Right?
Yeah. I'm
it,
a professional Amharitz is what I am. Yeah.
Congratulations. And but it also hasn't made you a professional Talmudist. Like what's I understand the problem that it's solving, like for the Jewish people, we should have the Talmud on the internet. But like, obviously to get involved with a project like this, something else is kind of burning that's motivating your desire to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think that probably goes back to that summer. Like that summer in Israel, you, me, and Brett, that was the first time I ever looked at a page of Talmud in my life. And I, as a grown-up, I think came to really appreciate the ways in which my education, which had in every possible way been like I got the best education you can get in this country from a secular perspective. And yet, like, how is it possible that I am finding myself at age 20, whatever, pretty much illiterate in our own culture, in Jewish textual culture? I mean, like, I went to Hebrew school and I've come from a family of people who were really engaged with the Jewish world. And yet, even still, I didn't look at a page of Talmud until I was on that summer program with you in Israel. And I think that I felt a sense of having been deprived of something and a desire, first of all, to create for myself, and I think Brett felt the same way, a tool that would allow us to access our tradition. Because actually, if you were sitting in my shoes at that time and you want, like, what is this thing, the Talmud? Like, I've read some of it. It's really interesting. I want to know more about this. What are your options? Like, geez, I'm going to go online to, the Eichler's website and order the $2,600 art scroll thing. And like, by the way, I don't even have enough shelf space for it. Like, what are my options?
And reinforce the shelves, by the way, if you do that. It's very
heavy. So I think I wanted to solve that problem for myself personally. But I also feel like this is a collective problem that we have as American Jews, that we are as literate as we could possibly be. We are the most literate culture in the history of the earth, probably. American Jews. I mean, I've heard a number that we buy 40% of all hardcover trade books. That can't possibly be true, but like, it's like, you kind of think maybe it could be true, right?
True, yeah.
And yet, like, so many of us don't have access to like this great tradition that's been going for 3,000 plus years. And I kind of wanted to have a hand in helping to change that. And so that's actually the real, I'd say, bigger mission of Sefaria, not just making these texts available. That's actually only the first step towards making them truly accessible, which is actually only the first step towards what I would say is the real ambition of Sefaria, which is reimagining textual learning and Torah as a central activity of American Judaism, which, like, that's a long way to go from where we are here today to that vision. But I think you need a tool like Sefaria in order to get there.
Yeah, so Daniel Septimus, the executive director of Sefaria, has told me this directly, and I think he'll share this as well tomorrow. We at Hartman are doing a webinar, excuse me, hosted by my colleague Rabbi Josh Layden, with Daniel Septimus, with Dr. Miriam Heller-Stern, and with Lisa Colton. The Revelation will be digitized around the whole question of Torah right now, the ways that it's shaping what we learn and how we learn, and beyond what we learn, like what is Judaism right now. And Daniel has said to me separately something echoing what you're saying, which is Sefaria is not about building a tool, it's actually revolutionizing and democratizing the study of Torah. That the goal is Torah study. It's not merely making this tool available. And it's striking to me, Josh, that that it might be precisely because you didn't come out of the world of professional Torah learners or teachers that might even be a desired activity. I kind of wonder whether it's almost the closed nature, the elitism that has been baked into Torah and Talmud study for a long time, that would actually be an obstacle for someone coming out of that training to say, oh, I want to make this available to people. Because whenever you talk about the democratization of knowledge, that comes, there are those who suffer, and the people who will suffer will necessarily be the elites. So I'm curious what you make of that dynamic. I also just wonder, at the same time, has that happened yet? Because my suspicion is that the people who most use Sefaria are the people who are already in the business, for whom it's now like, great, this is easier than pulling the text off the shelf and scanning it. But how does it actually lead towards people who are not in this business professionally saying, you know, oh, now this is available to me?
Well, I anticipated that we would have more pushback than we've had from the people who stand to lose from the democratization of Torah. I think that this is like super inside baseball, but I know that's a term you like to use. So I feel very comfortable bringing it out with you. I mean, like when we were like, our strategy from the beginning was you build the tool for the insiders, right? Like you start there, and like for the guy who's writing his PhD, that is music to our ears to hear like, oh, I couldn't do this before Sefaria existed, right? So you build it for that audience, and then you get the buy-in from that audience, which then allows you to start to spread your wings a little bit wider. And so there was a kind of in the grand strategy of unrolling Sefaria, I think that was, we always said first you go after rabbis and educators and make the tools that work for them. That's why the first thing we built was a source sheet builder. Mm-hmm. And something that was like, actually, you wouldn't necessarily say was essential to the vision of making Torah available, but it was a way to create something that was very useful immediately for educators and rabbis. So that's where we started.
And do you anticipate, I would say, that the average learner will be able to gain access to this tradition on their own through the availability of this knowledge, or does it still require the gatekeepers of the source sheet makers? I mean, Daf Yomi is an interesting story in and of itself, but even there, that is a system with gatekeepers, because people teach and guide.
So I think the answer is it's a necessary condition, but not a what do you call it? Not necessary, but help me out.
Sufficient.
Yes. I once was the memory champ, not anymore. Because you still need, like, and it's something Daniel and I talk about, go back and forth about all the time, and Brett as well. Like Torah, the kind of Torah that Torah is not actually a person and a text. It's a person and another person, or a person and a group of people mediated by a text. And right now, Sefaria is primarily creating a means for a person to engage with the text on a screen. And I think that is not actually a great on-ramp for people who don't know what they're looking at. And the best on-ramp is another person. And the next stage of Sefaria is going to be about figuring out how to empower that kind of Torah, interpersonal, relational, yeah, and mediated by the text. And that, I think, is the great opportunity, and the thing that like has not really penetrated the wider American Jewish world. Like people don't know that that's something that happens, or that that's something they could do, or that that's something that would be interesting or additive to their life. And I think that's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, there are more obstacles than just knowledge and access. There's also anxieties about one's own authenticity to be an independent and autonomous reader. There
Mhm.
are all sorts of people's baggage and obstacles from their own learning. I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but years ago I was teaching at before I came to Hartman, I was teaching at Brandeis, and I had a class that was designed for educators who were going to go work in Jewish day schools, but they actually weren't going to become Jewish educators. They were going to go be math teachers and English teachers, but they were going to go work specifically in Jewish day schools. So the program was like, how do you get enough fluency to be able to be conversant with the discourse of the school, even though you don't have to teach it yourself?
Mhm.
And at one point, I was basically teaching like an intro to Talmud. Originally, it had been an intro to Bible class. I was like, I can't teach Bible, I'll teach Talmud. And actually, it's more interesting because non-Jews have the Bible also, but like the Talmud, that's kind of where it's at. That's much more esoteric and weird. And I had this enormous pushback, like real resistance in the first couple of sessions. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And then finally, one of my students erupted and she just kind of started screaming. And she was like, it never made sense to me. I hated it when I was in Hebrew school, and it's obscure and it's mean and I don't get it. And who cares about this debate? And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I just kind of paused the class and I was like, who else here has baggage with the Talmud? And like all these hands go up because there's some of them are Jewish, some of them are not Jewish. And we spent like 2 hours doing kind of a therapy session on the bad ways in which they had encountered the rabbinic tradition before. And then it was a great class because they were like, okay, it doesn't have to be that. So those are the obstacles also for this learning. It's not just it's available to me, it's also it's associated. I mean, rabbinism is like an anti-Semitic adjective,
Right.
right?
It's
So
yeah.
with
It is Talmudic means like esoteric and like and boring and
an archaic, yeah.
yeah. But like interestingly, for the other 95% of American Jews, like they know the adjective Talmudic, but they don't actually know anything of the text. And it's like nobody has tried. I shouldn't say that. You know that I'm a perpetually hyperbolic person when I talk about things. So you would know to discount this, but yeah, like we haven't collectively really tried to really tried to put text at the center of Jewish experience.
I'm curious, Josh, when I was thinking about like the various projects that you've been engaged with and involved with, and I'm sure that they're on a straight line in your head, but they kind of seem like a little different. You know, you have Atlas Obscura, which is a big popular book in our house, of like finding the most random, strange, weird, amazing parts on planet Earth and putting them all in one place and actually encouraging people to go look at them, right? Giving them longitude and latitudinal signs to go find them. I feel like that's on one side. And then on the other side is becoming a memory champion, learning
Mhm.
that industry, and more than that, actually becoming a philosopher of memory. In your TED talk on this, you pull out aspects of the book that are about like who we become as people when we actually are people of stronger memory. And I kind of see Safaria at the middle of that Venn diagram. And I don't know whether it is more in the realm of like the collection of the arcane or the mastery of a particular field of knowledge. So I'm curious, like, what draws you to the Talmud? Is this about remembering and mastering something, or is it about this kind of journey to the obscure? And if you don't buy the whole frame,
I don't put it on that on those axes, I think, but I like it. I like that you gave such deep thought to the whole.
send me your CV and I'll Venn diagram your CV too.
No, I think that what ties it all together is a sense of curiosity and about curiosity about the things that one has inherited, actually, like about memory, about Judaism, about the world around us, and I think I feel a kind of compulsion to evangelize curiosity and encourage it, and that I would say actually all three of those projects, and I might even add Sukkot City to this as well, were about like pushing my own curiosity, but using my own curiosity as a proxy, or imagining that it might be a proxy for other people's curiosity. And yeah.
Do you remember, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you remember any of the Talmud that you felt you learned on Bronfman? You're not in trouble if you don't. I just have
I remember we opened up Pirkei Avot on the first day. And I guess that's not Talmud per se, but close enough, right?
Okay. Yeah, it counts.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I'm asking. It's not, you're not here for a Talmud test. I've thought a lot also about memory, but in a very different way than you've thought about memory. The memory that you were studying and mastering was the ability of the human mind to kind of create the elasticity to hold on to much more information than it thinks that it can, and then you help to explain all of the technologies by which we can do that, including these palaces of the mind, stories that we tell in order to hold on this information. And I've thought more about memory from the perspective of how useful it is that we can selectively forget, and how important it is morally for us to be able to selectively remember, which is kind of the opposite. I actually don't want to hold on to all of this stuff. And to me, part of what, it's not that I find Sefaria scary, right? I'm on the level of like, this is a much better way to have a library, agreed, more accessible. But in the theory that we can hold on to it a little bit more, I don't know. The rabbis have their own, have the depiction. You use the language of Ben Bagbag says, turn it over for everything is in it. Right? You keep going back and studying the same sections over and over again, not because you're actually trying to memorize them, but because you're trying to, I don't know, it's not about the text, it's about you. It's about this journey of formation of the individual. So I don't know, maybe you could just meditate on this, on what are we trying to remember and what are we trying to forget?
Well, first of all, you've touched on one of my central anxieties about Sefaria, which is that this, as we move from being people of the book to a people of the digital book, yes, democratization, I believe is fundamentally a good thing in this case, but like we already know from all the other experiences we've had of learning on screens, and especially over this last couple months, that like screen learning is shallow, and it pushes you towards shallowness and breadth over depth, shallow breadth over depth, and that is absolutely rumbling around in the minds. I mean, it's fortunate that the team at Sefaria is a team of I would say techno skeptics in so many ways. Like everybody top to bottom who are pushing this technological project has a kind of like, but like we don't actually really love technology. And so how do we do this in a way that is responsible and preserves the best of this without, and moves it into this new medium without undermining what's great about it? Yeah. Sorry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I understand the skepticism. Let me probe a little bit more on memory, which is like, I've taught the same piece of Talmud now, I don't know, 50 times, the story of the rabbis going into the orchard. I wrote a chapter of it in my book on memory about how I find it to be a metaphor for the Enlightenment. I was mad at myself afterwards that I wrote it as a chapter, because then I felt like it was like, that's what I had to say about it. And now when I read that text, it looks like something totally different. In fact, one time I even got like recordings of my own teaching of it, because I was like, this will come in handy the next time I teach. And I've never once obviously been able to listen to it. And I don't know, there's something just about Torah for me that's not about the acquisition and accumulation of knowledge,
Right.
kind of stuff that you hope you never forget, but it's actually like the real stuff of loving Torah is the ability to encounter a text you've actually seen before, to kind of forget what it's all about, and then to find something different, because ultimately it's not about the text, it's actually about the searcher in the text, or the journeyer.
Yeah, so what does that point towards then?
I don't know. I just don't know what that means for I guess I don't know what it means for these technologies. That's what I'm kind of getting at. Like what does it mean for a teacher and a learner to be engaged with that constant pursuit? Um,
Mhm.
that's all. I don't know that I have a question as much as I'm just struggling with this a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think there is like having everything at your fingertips is absolutely amazing in so many ways, and there are costs to it as well. And the costs are, of course, like harder to quantify. They're not tangible. Um, I would say one of the, I mean, this is a conversation you and I had once upon a time, but how about the oven of Achnai, that how like that was a text that like sort of entered circulation at some point that through Hartman actually, right?
I think David Hartman was one of the people who brought that text to where it is now. Yeah.
And now it's like a text that is in wide circulation. Everybody, like even it's one of the first texts people encounter when they're sort of encountering the Talmud for the first time. I suspect that we will find that like that canon of like greatest hits is going to evolve over time, and that Sefaria will have some role in that. As so, I don't know if this is confidential or it's not anymore. We're working on getting a translation of the Yerushalmi and up on Sefaria, and when that happens, like I think the Yerushalmi will become like it's not. It is just by virtue of being unavailable, it is less talked about. And I have a feeling certain there will be stories that will enter the sort of the conversation just because it's being made more available.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that probably is good. Although having spent a lot of time with Yerushalmi, I would say maybe yes, maybe no. Uh, yeah, I think it's there's no question that that accessibility changes what of Torah is taught and learned. I remember before there was Sefaria, there was the Bar Ilan CD-ROM, and where like you could get for I think it was like $900 access to the canon. And there was always kind of a running joke among teachers of Torah that like you could tell somebody's source sheet from that they had just basically entered in a search term to the Bar Ilan CD-ROM, because then it showed you like, oh, the source sheet is like every time that this phrase appears. And there was nothing particularly enlightening about it, because in the end, it might be that the Babylonian Talmud's version of the story of Achnai is like the best version and more interesting and more human than what will inevitably happen, which is many run-of-the-mill classes of like, let's look at the difference between the Yerushalmi version of the story of Achnai and the Bavli story of the version of Achnai. So I don't want to be on the side of non-democratization of knowledge or non-accessibility. I think what drew my read in this conversation is what drew you to this material was its magic, and that magic happens through curation more than happens through access.
Correct. Yes, and I think the curation and the dialogical, interpersonal, relational Torah that's going to grow out of Sefaria, like right now, that's happening off of our platform, and hopefully there's more of it happening because of the existence of Sefaria. But I think there's way more that we can do with Sefaria to make more of that happen.
Let me ask you a non-Sefaria question for a second and go back to the memory business, which is, of course, to me, of endless fascination. I don't know if you're still doing party tricks on the memory.
Jeez, thanks. Yes, I am still doing party tricks.
Yeah, come on. You know what I'm talking about. Pick up.
I can't do cards anymore. That's
the deck of cards.
Yeah, but I can remember your credit card number if you
Good to know. Good to know. It's good for like remembering all these Zoom links. Let me ask you a question just based on something I went back and read. Paul Ricoeur writes in Memory and History and Forgetting. So the French philosopher of memory, writes about the religious doctrine of memory is often tied up with ethical obligation, and especially the pursuit of justice. We remember what happened to those who are persecuted in order to be able to live out some sense of justice. So I've been thinking about this since I rewatched your TED Talk, which I'll recommend to folks, and we'll link to it. It's just a beautiful 18, 19 minutes. I mean, people should buy the book, but also watch the TED Talk, you know. And you had your talk on memory was very eloquent and elegant in terms of what's possible for us as humans. But I'm curious for you to reflect on Ricoeur's piece of this, which is what else emerges for us morally on the basis of having strong memories? What are the obligations that come to us as a result of being able to hold on to the injustices committed to others or by others? You know, I would love to add like the philosophy layer on top of your commitment to memory.
Well, so you're talking about collective memory, which is more your cup of tea than mine. But I'll weigh in, and then you can tell me why I'm right or wrong. But I mean, like every we're still talking however many thousands of years later about Yetzias Mitzrayim, like all the time. We can't stop talking about it, and we are as a people clearly obsessed with holding on to certain memories, and precisely because we get our ethics from them, and we've decided that we're gonna never forget certain things and make like. So I was learning, you know, mnemonic tricks as an individual to like basically make information more memorable and more sticky. And we have collectively invented some pretty phenomenal best in class mnemonic tricks as Jews to make sure that we don't forget these some of these events, and ritualized remembering in a way that almost nobody else has, or not to a degree that nobody else has. So
do you have thoughts on where if leaving aside collective memory and going back to individual for a second, where the work of memorization and mnemonics lives for the individual in the work of education? I mean, you're now, you know, you have your own kids. They assume where, you know, there's a lot of debates in the field of education about whether people should be remembering things in Jewish education. To, you know, I had to memorize like a Macbeth song, you know, Macbeth monologue. That's gone. I'm curious where that sits for you in terms of your own views of education.
So, and this actually probably maybe does come back to your earlier question, which is, and it actually ties into Safari as well and what you're asking about there. Like, you could take the position that we don't need to, like, why do we need to remember anything anymore? Why, we can look it up in Google. Why would we bother? And you could extend that to you know, Jewish texts. Now, you know, I've got Safari. Why do I need to really learn this text deeply or engage with it that deeply, or engage with it that repetitively, as you said earlier? My feeling is like our memories, that idea is based on a faulty metaphor of memory, which is that our memories are like banks that we deposit information into and take information out of when we need it. And that probably, that's just not true. Our memories are more like lenses, that they are implicated in our very perception of the world. And everything that I am looking at and making sense of at any moment is actually being made sense of through this network of all the memories that I've put into my mind over the 37 years that I've been alive. And the downside to neglecting our memories is that we're actually neglecting that perceptual lens. And the genius of like Jewish pedagogy is that like all of these memories that we are so concerned with implanting into our children, is we're implanting those memories into our children because, not because they're memories, but because they are how they are going to make sense of the world. And yeah, there you go.
When Noah was 3, he was in the backseat of the car. I was driving him home from daycare, in Brookline, and he said to me from the back seat, "Abba, who are the Jewish people?" And I was like, "Amazing, great question. Can't believe I got to this already in child rearing." So I was like, "Oh no, we're the Jewish people," and he burst into tears. And I pulled over the car. I pulled over the car and I said, "What's going on, Noah?" And he goes, "I don't want Paro to get me."
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh man, that is like the success and failure of Jewish education all in one." Like, it embedded in him some sense of belonging to collective memory. The story was his. Like, that's your palace of memory. It's his story. So I didn't do like a whole disentangling of history and memory and fact and narrative. I calmed him down. But it's kind of, that's the dark side. The nicer way to think about it is also, apropos some of your metaphors. You see, for many great sages, the way that they talk about the books that they read is that they're with their friends. That's how Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about when reading Maimonides. He's like, "I'm not reading it in a book. I'm talking to Maimonides." And there, I think that probably some of the pedagogy of memory is critical, because you're not reacquainting yourself with an obscure idea that you haven't seen in a long time and cannot get a hold on. You're actually acclimating yourself for this being the language of friendship and the language of meaning that's sourced in relationship to these texts and ideas that came before you.
I mean, there's nothing I love. Like, it is probably my favorite Jewish experience outside of like sitting in a sukkah. On every Shabbat when I open up the Tanakh and like re-encounter a story that I've read however many dozens of times, and like, oh, I didn't notice that before, or like, that's interesting. Like, that's something, like, I can see this now in a new way that I didn't see it in all of these previous times of reading it. And if you think about how many texts in our life we engage with that deeply, of course, there's no other text that we engage with that deeply. And it's a very old-fashioned way of reading, because like, once upon a time, you couldn't have all these books on your bookshelves around you. You, like, if you read a few books and you read them deeply, and we read a lot of books and we read them shallowly, except for what the Jewish way of engaging with text calls upon us to do, which is to go really deep and to repetitively, and to find yourself anew in the text every time you read it. And so that's the big beautiful idea that I feel like we still haven't quite like communicated to the masses, how to do this and how to find beauty in it, and how to relate to another person through that experience.
Yeah, I keep harassing my kids, my two boys, that they just keep reading the Harry Potter books over and over. And maybe I just embrace it. They're doing to books what Jews do to books, which is, I love it. I don't remember all of it. I want to hear it again. And I'm re-enchanted by it each time. Josh, it's always wonderful to talk to you. Last question, which is something that you're planning. You don't have to hold you to it. Something you're planning on learning this Shavuot.
I don't have a plan. So hit me. This is a great opportunity for you to tell me. Send me to bed with a book in my hands.
I'll say this. If you don't have Jeffrey Rubinstein's Rabbinic Stories,
I do have that. Yeah.
Take the book and read one of them with your kids. They're the best stories. They're in English. They're accessible.
I had not thought about doing that with my son. That's a great idea.
I started doing this with my kids a few years ago. Enough of the stories are like, there's weirdness. They're like, the kids like weird stories.
Yeah.
And my kids intuited early on, like, oh, I like stories, and I like stories where there's like strange things that I can jump in on, and then be commentators and interpreters. So yeah.
By the way, this is a project we should work on together. There is no good curriculum for, like, I'm a dad, I'm a parent, I want to like I want to do Torah with my kids, age whatever through whatever.
Yep.
Like, what should I do? How should I do it? Like, show me how this works.
Yeah.
And like, what are the texts? And like bedtime reading, the bedtime Torah, you know?
It's a great project, and it's a great project. The corollary project to that is we got to convince the people at PJ Library that it's not just the best Jewish stories that come out of the Hasidic world. That's thought of like where Jews are as like Eastern Europe, but actually like Talmud, which is kind of the OG Jewish story where you started Sefaria from. That's a place for us to tell our children.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you being with me today, Josh. Thanks to all of you for listening to our show, and special thanks to Josh of Sefaria for taking time this week. Identity Crisis is a product of the Shalom Hartman Institute. It was produced and edited this week by David Zvi Kalman. Our managing producer is Dan Friedman, with music provided by So-Called. In addition to the podcast, recordings of Identity Crisis are streamed on Facebook through jewishLIVE. Please check our Facebook page for details about future recording times, and please join us. To learn more about the Shalom Hartman Institute, visit us online, shalomhartman.org. We want to know what you think about the show. You can write to us at identitycrisis@shalomhartman.org. You can subscribe to our show in the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, SoundCloud, and everywhere else podcasts are available. See you next week. Hope to see you sooner than that at Sinai on the anniversary of getting the Torah. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and stay healthy.